The stitches on my hand were still there when my daughter called to ask if I'd paid her car insurance. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea I hadn't touched, watching the steam rise and disappear into the cold morning air. The bandage on my palm, 4 stitches from where I'd caught myself on the corner of the fireplace mantel, itched underneath the gauze. The bruise along my left shoulder had faded from deep purple to a sickly yellow-green, the kind of color that meant healing was happening whether I wanted it to or not. 7 days had passed since Thanksgiving. 7 days since my daughter looked me in the eye and called me a liar in my own living room, and 7 days since her husband grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks shaped like fingers. My phone buzzed on the table. Cassandra. I stared at her name for 3 full rings. Then I answered, "Mom?" Her voice was smooth, practiced. She'd always been good at sounding normal. "I wanted to check on you. Did you?" A pause. Careful. "Of course. You're my mother. The car insurance, Cassie." I kept my voice the way I'd learned to keep it during 31 years of nursing level. Professional. Stripped of everything that could be used against me. "You called to ask about your car insurance. I just thought, since the account is still technically set up for autopay." "No," I said. "It's not. I closed that account." The silence that followed was so long I could hear her breathing. "You closed it. Everything. Last Monday." Another pause. And then her voice shifted the smooth surface, cracking just slightly, just enough for me to hear what was underneath. "Mom, you need to calm down. You're being dramatic about all of this." I hung up, sat there looking at the phone. Outside my window, a pair of cardinals moved through the bare branches of the oak tree my late husband Frank had planted when our daughter was born, 34 years ago. The tree was 30 feet tall now, spreading wide enough to shade half the yard in summer. It had outlasted Frank. It had outlasted my marriage to the idea that family meant safety. It would probably outlast whatever was left of the relationship between me and the child I'd spent the best years of my life raising. I want to tell you how I got here. I want to explain how a 68-year-old retired nurse, who spent 3 decades taking care of strangers, ended up needing to take care of herself against the one person who was supposed to love her most. It started with my knee. In March of last year, after 2 years of grinding pain and a bone-on-bone x-ray that looked like something out of a medical textbook on what not to let happen, I finally had the knee replacement surgery my doctor had been recommending since Frank died. I'd put it off because I was stubborn, because I didn't want to be helpless, because being vulnerable scared me more than the pain. Nurses make the worst patients. We know too much about everything that can go wrong. My daughter, Cassandra Cassie, had been wonderful in the weeks leading up to surgery. She drove me to pre-op appointments, helped me rearrange my house so I wouldn't have to climb stairs while I recovered, stocked my refrigerator with meals she'd prepared herself. She was attentive in a way she hadn't been in years, and I let myself believe it meant something. I let myself believe she'd grown into someone I could lean on. 2 weeks before the surgery, sitting at this same kitchen table, she brought up the power of attorney. "It's just a precaution, Mom." She'd poured us both coffee like she owned the kitchen. "While you're in recovery, you'll need someone managing your finances, paying bills, making sure nothing lapses." Derek and I looked into it. "It's totally standard." I hesitated. I want to be honest about that. I hesitated, and my hesitation was the right instinct, and I overrode it, because she was my daughter. Because Frank was gone, and she was the only family I had left. Because it felt ungracious to say to your child, the one you'd nursed through ear infections and heartbreaks and a divorce at 31, "I don't trust you with my money." So I signed. The surgery went smoothly. 6 days in the hospital, then a rehabilitation center for 3 weeks, then home with a physical therapist coming 3 times a week. I was focused on healing, on bending my knee past 90 degrees, on navigating the stairs without gripping the railing like my life depended on it, on getting back to some version of the woman I'd been before pain became the organizing principle of every single day. I wasn't watching my bank account. That's what they counted on. I found out the same way I found out everything important in my life by accident. On an ordinary day when I wasn't looking for trouble. It was late August. 6 months after the surgery. I was reviewing my finances for an end-of-year charitable donation I made every year to the Children's Hospital, where I'd worked a small thing, $500, my way of feeling still connected to a profession I loved. The balance in my primary account was $3,200. I sat very still and looked at that number for a long time. Then I looked at it again. Then I pulled up my transaction history and started reading backward through the year. Between late March and early August, from the week after my surgery until 6 weeks before I found out, there had been 41 wire transfers out of my account, amounts ranging from $800 to $4,000, all to an account I didn't recognize, all initiated with the power of attorney Cassandra had asked me to sign. I did the math 3 times because I needed to be sure. $47,200. Gone. I didn't call my daughter. I didn't call the police. I sat in Frank's old armchair in the living room, the brown one I'd been meaning to reupholster for years, and stared out the window at his oak tree, and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way I used to tell anxious patients. Slow down. Think. Don't react. Think. Then I called my oldest friend, Ruth, who'd been my charge nurse for 19 years, and who I trusted with every serious thing in my life. She answered on the second ring. "Something's happened," I said. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. She was there in 15. She sat across from me and read through my bank statements with her reading glasses on and her jaw getting tighter with every page. And when she finished, she looked up at me with an expression I recognized, the expression she used when a patient's family member had made a terrible, irreversible decision. "You need a lawyer," she said. "I know. And you need to cancel that power of attorney today." "I know, Eleanor." She leaned forward. "Do you understand what she did?" I understood. I'd been understanding it for the past 3 hours, going through every stage of it. The disbelief, the desperate search for an alternative explanation, and finally the grief. The particular kind of grief that doesn't come from death, but from discovering that someone you loved completely was not who you believed them to be. "She's my daughter," I said. "She stole $47,000 from you while you were recovering from surgery." Ruth's voice was gentle, but it didn't bend. "That's what she is." I contacted an attorney the next morning. Her name was Patricia Hollis, 60s, sharp. The kind of woman who'd heard every version of every family betrayal and had stopped being surprised years ago. She listened to everything, reviewed the documentation, and then looked at me over her reading glasses with an expression that managed to be both sympathetic and completely matter-of-fact. "We need to notify the bank and file a formal fraud complaint," she said. "The power of attorney doesn't give her unlimited access. There are fiduciary duties, and $47,000 in wire transfers with no documented purpose for your benefit is a clear violation. This is elder financial abuse. It's a felony. She's my daughter." Patricia looked at me for a long moment. "I know," she said. "That makes it worse, not better. But it doesn't make it not a crime. I spent September and October documenting everything. Bank records, wire transfer confirmations, the power of attorney documents, communication logs. Ruth came over every weekend and helped me organize files. I'd spent 31 years building meticulous patient records, and I applied that same precision to building the case against my own child. It was the strangest form of heartbreak, careful and systematic and thorough. Cassandra called every week, breezy and normal, asking about my knee, suggesting we get lunch, mentioning casually that she and Derek were looking at a new car. I answered each call with the steady, level voice I'd developed over decades of hard professional moments. I said I was fine. I said we should get lunch soon. I said nothing about what I knew. I kept thinking about the car, the one she mentioned, the one she and Derek were apparently shopping for. "A luxury SUV," she'd said once, almost in passing. "The kind that starts at $60,000. I thought about that while I was building my documentation binders. I thought about whether any of my $47,000 was going toward a down payment. I invited them to Thanksgiving. I need you to understand that this was deliberate. Patricia advised against it. She said I should wait until after the formal complaint was filed, until things were further along legally. But I needed to see their faces. I needed to hear what they said when they knew they'd been caught. Maybe some part of me still hoped there was an explanation. There wasn't. But I needed to hear them try. They arrived at 2 o'clock. Cassie in a new coat I hadn't seen before, and Derek in a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my electric bill. They brought wine, a good bottle, expensive. I wondered whose money paid for it. I'd made everything from scratch. Turkey, stuffing, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce with orange zest the way Frank used to love it, pumpkin pie from a recipe his mother wrote down for me on an index card 35 years ago, the card so worn now the handwriting was barely legible. I'd been in the kitchen since 7 in the morning. I wasn't nervous. Exactly. I was resolved. We sat down to eat. The table looked beautiful. The light was right. Late afternoon and golden. The kind of light that makes everything look the way things looked in better years. Cassie talked about her book club. Derek talked about a project at work. I listened, served food, watched their faces. After dessert, when we were still sitting at the table with coffee cups going cold, I went to the kitchen drawer and came back with a folder. I set it on the table between us. I want to talk about the wire transfers, I said. The room went very quiet. Derek's face didn't change, not right away. Cassie's did. Just for a moment. Just a flicker. The careful social surface shifting underneath. Her eyes went to the folder and then to my face and then to Derek and then back to me. Mom, $47,200. I said. Between March and August. 41 transfers. All initiated under the power of attorney. You asked me to sign 2 weeks before my surgery. Derek leaned back in his chair. A slow, deliberate movement. The kind that's meant to look relaxed, but isn't. Eleanor, there's obviously been some kind of misunderstanding. There hasn't. You were on pain medication for weeks after surgery. Memory can be unreliable. I'm a retired nurse, Derek. My voice didn't shake. I want you to know that it didn't shake. Not even a little. I know exactly what opioids do to memory. And I know what my bank records say. I had 41 documented transfers. I have the receiving account number. I have a lawyer. Something changed in Cassie's face at that last word. The social surface didn't just shift. It fell away entirely, and what was underneath was something I'd never seen on my daughter's face before. Something cold and calculating that looked back at me with no warmth at all. You have a lawyer, she repeated. I do. So this isn't, you're not here to work this out. You're not giving us a chance to explain. I'm sitting at my Thanksgiving table giving you exactly that chance, I said. Explain? She looked at Derek again. Something passed between them, a married couple's silent communication, the kind Frank and I used to have. Except what passed between Cassie and Derek in that moment wasn't love. It was strategy. We needed it, Cassie said finally. I waited. Derek's business. She stopped. Started again. We were in trouble. Real trouble. We would have lost the house. We would have lost everything. And you have more than enough, Mom. You have Frank's life insurance, his pension, the house is paid off. You don't have any real expenses anymore. It wasn't going to hurt you. It was $47,000 that you weren't even using. Her voice was rising now, the careful control dissolving. You had it just sitting there. We were drowning and you were sitting on money you didn't need and you never would have even missed it if she stopped. If I hadn't looked, I said, if I'd been less careful, if I'd been the kind of old woman who doesn't check her accounts. That's not what I meant. You waited until I had surgery, I said. You waited until I was in a hospital bed, and then a rehabilitation facility, and then home on pain medication, and you moved money out of my account for 5 months. That's not a mistake, Cassandra. That's a plan. Derek stood up. He was a large man. Derek, 6'3", former college athlete, the kind of physical presence that fills a room. He stood up, and he looked down at me and said, You need to drop this. I didn't move. Sit down. I'm serious, Eleanor. You go forward with whatever you think you're doing, and you will regret it. We're family. This is family business. You don't bring lawyers into family business. You committed a felony against me, I said. That stopped being family business. He took a step around the table toward me. I don't think he decided to. I think something in him just moved before his brain caught up, the way things do when people are used to being bigger than the room. He grabbed my arm, my left arm, the one with the shoulder that was still tender from physical therapy, and his grip was hard enough that I felt it all the way up to my neck. Cassie said his name sharp, alarmed. He'd surprised her too. I don't know exactly what happened next. I was trying to pull back, and the floor was uneven near the fireplace hearth. An inch of elevation I'd always meant to have fixed, and when I pulled away from Derek's grip, I stumbled backward and my hand came down on the corner of the mantel, and the edge caught my palm, and then I was on the floor with my hand bleeding and my shoulder screaming, and the room full of a ringing silence. Cassie was standing with both hands over her mouth. Derek was standing very still, looking at me on the floor with an expression I couldn't read. You need to go, I said. My voice was completely steady. That surprised me more than anything else. Get out of my house right now. Mum, right now? They left. I heard Cassie crying on the way out. Real crying, I think, though I'd stopped being able to tell what was real from her. I heard Derek's voice low and urgent, and then the front door, and then their car, and then silence. I sat on the floor for a few minutes, looked at my bleeding hand, looked up at the oak tree through the front window, dark branches against a gray November sky. Then I called Ruth. She came, and we sat in the emergency room for 3 hours, while a tired young resident put 4 stitches in my palm and asked me carefully, professionally, what had happened. I told him everything. He documented my shoulder, my hand, the faint marks Derek's grip had left on my arm. He told me I should file a police report. He said it the way good medical professionals say difficult things clearly, without drama, as a statement of fact. I know, I said. Will you? I thought about Cassie's face when she said we needed it. I thought about 5 months of wire transfers, 41 of them. Careful and systematic and ongoing for as long as they thought they could get away with it. I thought about Derek's hand on my arm and the floor coming up to meet me and sitting alone in my kitchen afterward, wondering how I'd raised someone who could do this. Yes, I said. The police report was filed that night. The formal fraud complaint with the bank was already in process through Patricia's office. By the following Monday, the power of attorney was legally revoked. Every account Cassandra had ever had access to was closed, and the receiving account, which turned out to be a joint account in Derek's name at a bank across town, had been flagged by the Financial Crimes Unit. December was paperwork and depositions, and the specific exhaustion of a life reorganizing itself around a truth you didn't want to know. Ruth came over every week. My neighbor, Helen, a retired school teacher who brought me tomatoes from her garden every summer, started dropping by on Tuesdays with casseroles and the kind of practical kindness that doesn't require any explaining. Patricia called every Thursday with updates, always beginning with, "Here's where we are," and ending with, "You're doing exactly the right thing." Everyone kept telling me I was doing the right thing. I kept waiting for it to feel like the right thing. My knee was fully healed by then, strong and pain-free, the way Dr. Nguyen had promised it would be. I walked 2 miles every morning along the path by the park, the one Frank and I used to walk together on Sunday mornings with coffee and travel mugs. I walked it alone now, in the cold December air, and thought about the things you think about when your certainties have all been taken apart. I thought about the things I'd missed or ignored over the years. The comments Cassie had made about money, always knowing the price of things, always interested in what I'd done with Frank's life insurance, always asking in that careful sideways way whether I'd thought about updating my will. I'd told myself it was responsible adult behavior. I'd told myself she was being practical. I'd told myself a lot of things. Derek had always made me uneasy in a way I could never quite name. He was charming. That effortless social confidence that makes people seem more trustworthy than they are. He remembered your coffee order and asked about your health, and looked you in the eye when he talked to you. He'd also, I realize now, made sure that every significant financial conversation I had with my daughter happened when he was present. He'd been in that kitchen when the power of attorney papers appeared. He'd been the one to bring them out of the folder. I called Cassandra once in December, in a moment of weakness at 2 a.m. when grief and insomnia combined into something that felt like an emergency. She answered, groggy, and I just sat there on the phone, not saying anything for a long moment. "Mom," she finally said, quietly, no strategy in her voice at that hour, just tiredness. "Did you think about me at all?" I asked. "While you were doing it? Did you think about me once?" A long silence. "I told myself you wouldn't mind," she said finally. "I told myself you had enough. I knew that was wrong. I knew it the whole time, and I kept doing it anyway." It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in years, maybe ever. I didn't know what to do with it. "I loved you more than anything," I said. "You and your father. That's everything I had." "I know, Mom. It wasn't enough to make you honest." I hung up and didn't call again. The arraignment was in January. Cassandra and Derek were charged together elder financial abuse, theft in the first degree. And Derek was additionally charged with assault and battery. They each had separate attorneys. And by February, they were clearly not presenting a unified front anymore. Patricia told me the word in legal circles was that Derek's lawyer was angling for him to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. Cassandra's lawyer was maintaining her position that everything had been authorized. The security camera from the bank across town told a different story. 41 withdrawals from Derek's receiving account, many of them the same day the transfers from my account came through. They had dinner receipts from restaurants I'd never been to, a charge for $2,000 at a furniture store 3 weeks after my surgery. Cassie's car, the one she'd driven to Thanksgiving, had been purchased in April, during the period when my account was being systematically drained. $62,000, fully paid. I testified twice, once at the preliminary hearing and once at trial, which was set for August. Both times I sat in the witness chair and told the truth as clearly and completely as I knew how. Both times the defense attorneys tried to make me seem like a confused old woman, misremembering things, a bitter mother weaponizing the legal system because her feelings were hurt. Both times I looked at them steadily and said, "I am a retired nurse with 31 years of experience maintaining careful records. I have documentation for everything I've told you." Both times the jury looked at me and then looked at the bank records and the security footage, and I could see the math happening in their faces. Ruth sat in the gallery both days. Helen came the second day, quietly taking a seat in the back row with her gray hair neat and her hands folded in her lap. I didn't know she was coming. When I saw her, something in my chest loosened in a way I hadn't expected. Derek cooperated. Partway through pretrial proceedings, his attorney worked out an arrangement. Full cooperation, detailed testimony about the scope of the scheme. In exchange for a reduced charge on the assault, he confirmed everything the bank records showed. He confirmed that the plan had been his idea, that Cassandra had been a willing participant, that they'd spent the money on the car, on furniture, on a trip to the Caribbean that Cassie had described to me as a work conference. I sat in Patricia's office on the afternoon she told me about Derek's cooperation agreement and stared at the wall for a while. "She went on a trip," I said. "Puerto Rico, according to the records. January. While you were still in physical therapy. January. When I was still practicing walking without a limp. When I was measuring recovery in 10-degree increments of knee flexion and the distance I could walk before the ache became too much." "Okay," I said. "Eleanor, I'm okay." I was, in the way that meant I was past the point of being surprised. Let's talk about August. The trial lasted 4 days. The evidence was, as Patricia had told me it would be, overwhelming. The wire transfer records, the security footage, Derek's testimony, the documentation of how the money was spent piece by piece. It built a picture that was impossible to argue with. Cassandra's attorney tried. He suggested I had given verbal authorization. He suggested my memory was unreliable. He suggested that power of attorney relationships between parents and adult children were inherently informal in ways that made clear legal lines difficult to define. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 20 minutes. Guilty on all counts for both defendants. I was sitting in the hallway outside the courtroom when the verdict came in. Ruth was next to me, and she gripped my hand when the clerk read it out. Each count, each name. Cassandra sat with her face very still and her hands folded on the table in front of her. She didn't look at me. Derek stared at the table. Sentencing was 3 weeks later. I sat in the front row. I'd asked Patricia if I could read a victim impact statement, and she'd said yes. And I'd spent 2 weeks writing it and rewriting it, trying to find the words for something that didn't fit neatly into words. What it means to be robbed by someone you nursed through fevers and drove to school every morning for 12 years. What it costs you not just financially. Though $47,000 from a fixed retirement income is not nothing but in the specific interior way that can't be measured or reimbursed. I stood up in that courtroom on a Tuesday morning in September, and I read every word I'd written, slowly and clearly, and I looked at my daughter while I read it. I said, I raised you to be honest. I said I gave you access to my finances because I trusted you and because I loved you and because you were the only family I had left after your father died. I said, I want you to understand that what you took from me wasn't just money. You took the years I spent believing that I had done my job, that I had raised a person who knew right from wrong. I don't have those years back. She was crying by the end. I didn't find it satisfying in the way I thought I might. Judge Warren sentenced Cassandra to 4 years probation, restitution of the full $47,200 plus 8% annual interest, and 200 hours of community service. Derek received 18 months in a county correctional facility, followed by 3 years supervised probation. The judge noted the deliberate nature of the scheme, the exploitation of a vulnerable period in my recovery, and the physical assault as aggravating factors. 18 months. I watched them take Derek out of the courtroom, and I felt something I still can't name precisely. Not satisfaction, not relief. Something quieter than either of those. Ruth drove me home. We sat at my kitchen table, this kitchen table, the one Frank and I picked out when we moved into this house 38 years ago, the one where I'd made every major decision of my adult life and drank tea as the afternoon light changed, and the oak tree in the yard went from gold to shadow. How are you feeling? Ruth asked. Like I aged 10 years and got some of them back, I said. She laughed, soft and tired and real. That sounds about right. I've had time now to think about what the past year has taught me, the things I wish someone had told me earlier, the things I'd say now to other women who are sitting where I was sitting before I found out trusting the wrong person, explaining away the uneasy feeling, choosing generosity over caution because it felt like the more loving choice. Here's what I know. Vulnerability isn't weakness, but it does create opportunity for people who have already decided that opportunity matters more than you do. Signing a document because someone you love asks you to, without independent legal advice, without a third party present, without understanding every clause, that's not love. That's exposure. Get your own attorney before you sign anything that gives someone else control over your money. Get one even if it feels mistrustful, especially if it feels mistrustful. And here's the other thing. Holding someone accountable for what they did to you is not the same as not loving them. It took me a long time to separate those two things, and I'm not sure I've separated them entirely even now. I think about Cassandra every day. I think about the little girl who used to sleep in the room down the hall, who brought me wildflowers from the yard, who cried on my shoulder after her divorce, and let me sit with her through the worst of it. I think about that person, and I think about the woman who sat across from me at Thanksgiving and told me the money wasn't hurting anyone because I had enough and I wasn't using it anyway. I don't know exactly when those became the same person. I don't know how to hold both of them in my mind at once, but I know this. I crawled to the phone. After they left me on my own kitchen floor, I crawled to the phone and called for help. And that's the version of myself I want to keep. The one who asks for help when she needs it. The one who calls the police and tells the truth in court and reads every word of her victim impact statement, with her voice steady and her eyes open. The one who walks 2 miles every morning on the path by the park and fills the bird feeder and has tea with Ruth on Thursdays, and is still, after everything, here. Frank's oak tree is bare again. Winter coming early this year, the leaves gone by mid-October, but the tree is healthy, the roots hold, even in the cold, even through everything. In the spring, it will be full of leaves again, and cardinals, and the particular kind of morning light that makes me feel for a moment like nothing bad has ever happened in this yard. I'm still here for that. I made sure of it.